I woke up because I couldn't breathe right, and it took me a full 10 seconds to understand why. There was an arm around my waist, a hand curled into the front of my shirt like it had fallen asleep holding on, a face pressed close to the back of my neck, breath warm and slow against my skin, and the unmistakable, terrifying weight of another body fitted against mine like it had done this before. Noelle. For a moment, I didn't move. I didn't even let my eyes fully open. The room was dark except for the thin gray light coming through the curtains, the kind of pre-dawn color that meant it was somewhere around 5 in the morning, the ocean outside still churning from the storm that had rattled the windows most of the night. I could hear it now, that low, relentless roar, waves hitting the rocks below the cliff house over and over like something that refused to be finished. We'd joked about this last night, the booking mix-up. Only one queen bed left in the house because Lena had somehow reserved the wrong number of rooms, and Brielle had laughed so hard she'd nearly fallen off the couch, and Noelle had rolled her eyes and said, "It's fine. Rowan and I have shared a bed 100 times. We're basically an old married couple who doesn't do anything interesting." And everyone had laughed, and I had laughed too, because that was the joke. That was always the joke. 12 years of people saying we acted like a couple, and 12 years of both of us laughing it off like it was the funniest thing either of us had ever heard. Noelle had promised to stay on her side. She'd drawn an actual invisible line down the middle of the mattress with her finger. Very serious, very dramatic, and said, "Don't cross the border, Ellis." And I'd said something about how she was the one who steals blankets, and we'd both gone to sleep laughing. I was not laughing now. Her arm was heavy and warm across my stomach. Her knees were tucked behind mine. Her breathing was too even, too careful, the kind of breathing you do when you're trying to convince someone you're asleep, not the loose, unconscious rhythm of someone who actually is. I knew the difference. I'd known Noelle Hart for 12 years. I knew what she sounded like asleep on a plane, asleep on my couch after a double shift at the hospital, asleep in the passenger seat on long drives up the coast. This wasn't that. This was a woman lying very still and hoping I wouldn't notice she was awake. I noticed everything. I noticed the way her fingers had curled into the fabric of my shirt instead of resting loose against it. I noticed that her heartbeat, which I could feel faintly against my back, was too fast for someone who was supposed to be dreaming. I noticed that when I shifted my weight, just barely, just enough to test the water, her arm tightened around me for one full second before it deliberately, carefully loosened again, like she'd caught herself doing something she hadn't meant to do. "Noelle?" I whispered. Nothing. Her breath didn't change. Her arm didn't move. "Noelle, I know you're awake." Silence, except for the storm outside and the small, private storm happening about 4 inches from the back of my neck. I lay there in the dark, feeling her pulse against my spine, feeling the particular ache of wanting something you've spent 12 years telling yourself you're not allowed to want. And I thought about moving away. I thought about rolling to the far edge of the bed and pretending in the morning that none of this had happened, the way we pretended about everything that mattered. Instead, I closed my eyes. I let myself stay. Before we return to the story, a quick note for my lovely viewers. While this YouTube series keeps things safe, my Patreon is where the real fun happens. That's where you'll find completely uncensored GL stories, much hotter exclusive videos, and bolder adventures that are just too spicy for YouTube. If you want the full, no-limits experience and to support more of this kind of storytelling, the Patreon link is in the description below Bepulls. I didn't sleep again after that. I lay there measuring the minutes by the gray light shifting on the ceiling, feeling Noelle's arm around me like a question neither of us was brave enough to ask out loud, until the house started to wake up around us in small, ordinary sounds. A door somewhere down the hall, the pipes groaning as someone ran a shower, a gull screaming outside the window like it had personal opinions about the weather. Noelle's arm disappeared from around my waist so fast it was like she'd been electrocuted. By the time I rolled over, she was already sitting up on the far edge of the bed, hair a wreck, stretching in a way that was just a little too theatrical, a yawn that was just a little too loud. "Morning," she said, not looking at me. "Storm kept me up half the night. You sleep okay?" I studied the back of her neck, the tension sitting in her shoulders like a held breath. "Fine," I said. slept fine. She was already pulling on a sweatshirt, already halfway to the door, already performing a version of Noelle that was doing normal so hard it had stopped looking like normal at all. "I'm going to make coffee before Brielle wakes up and drinks it all straight from the pot again," she said. And then she was gone, and I was left sitting in a bed that still smelled like her, staring at the wrinkled sheets where her body had been, wondering if I had imagined the whole thing. I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. You don't imagine a heartbeat. By the time I made it downstairs, the kitchen was full of noise and bacon grease, and the particular chaos of 5 women trying to use one coffee maker at once. Rain hammered sideways against the big windows that looked out over the cliff, the ocean beyond them the color of wet slate, whitecaps chewing at the rocks below. Brielle was standing at the stove in an oversized flannel, waving a spatula like a conductor's baton, mid-sentence about something that had happened at her office holiday party 8 months ago that she was still, apparently, furious about. "There she is," Brielle said when she saw me, grinning wide. "How was the honeymoon suite?" "It has 1 bed, Brielle, not a honeymoon." "Uh-huh." Brielle exchanged a look with Lena, who was perched on the counter eating dry cereal directly from the box, bare feet swinging. "You two were awfully quiet up there. No fighting over blankets, no elbows to the ribs. Very suspicious." "We're professionals," Noelle called from where she stood at the coffee maker, back to the room. 12 years of best friend training. We could share a bed with a python and still wake up in the same position we fell asleep in. "That's not the flex you think it is," Sabrina said, mildly from the table, not looking up from her phone, and the whole kitchen laughed, and I laughed too, because it was easier than not laughing. We ate at the long farmhouse table, with the storm going gray and violent behind the glass, plates of eggs and bacon and the sourdough Sabrina had picked up in town the day before, and Lena kept narrating the weather like a very unqualified meteorologist, and Brielle kept circling back to her holiday party grievance, and somewhere in the middle of it, under the table, Noelle's knee found mine. It wasn't an accident. I knew the difference between an accident and this, the way she didn't pull away when our knees touched, the way she went very still, the way neither of us moved for what felt like an embarrassingly long time while Brielle talked about a coworker named Chad and his crimes against the office potluck. I looked down at my plate. Noelle looked very intently at her coffee mug. Neither of us said a word. "Rowan," Brielle snapped her fingers in front of my face. "Earth to Rowan. I asked if you're bringing the good camera to the lighthouse today, or the little one." "The good one?" I said, too fast, and felt my face heat, and under the table Noelle's knee finally, slowly, pulled away. "You're being weird," Brielle said, narrowing her eyes at me, then at Noelle, then back at me, with the specific suspicion of a woman who had known us both for 6 years and had opinions about everything. "You're both being weird." "We're always weird," Noelle said. "It's our whole thing." "No," Brielle said slowly. "Usually your weird is like matching. Today it's like separate weird, individually weird. It's different." "Eat your bacon, Brielle," Sabrina said, and mercifully, the conversation moved on, but I caught Sabrina watching us for a second longer than the joke required, her expression unreadable, filing something away. The rain hadn't let up by early afternoon, but I wanted the light anyway, that flat silver look the ocean gets during a storm, so I grabbed my camera and my rain shell and headed down the cliff path toward the shore. I wasn't surprised when Noelle followed me out with the big umbrella, the striped one from the hall closet, and fell into step beside me without asking if she could come. She never asked, she just came, the way she'd been coming to wherever I was for 12 years, and assumed permission neither of us had ever questioned until now, when suddenly it felt like something that needed questioning. "You don't have to babysit me," I said, adjusting my lens against the wet air. "I'm not babysitting you. I'm holding an umbrella over a woman who refuses to wear a hood because it messes up her, quote, sight lines." She held it higher, angling it against the wind. "This is different." We walked down toward the tide pools in a silence that used to be comfortable and now felt like it had teeth. I crouched to get a shot of a wave breaking against the rocks, and Noelle stood close behind me, close enough that I could feel her presence like a held breath, and when I stood back up too fast, my shoulder brushed her chest, and we both went still again, the way we'd gone still at the breakfast table, the way we seemed to keep going still around each other now, like two people circling something neither of us would name. "Can I ask you something?" I said, before I could stop myself. "Depends what it is. Why are you acting like this?" "Like what?" "Like this." I gestured vaguely between us. The umbrella, the careful foot of distance she'd kept all morning, that used to not exist. "You've been weird since we woke up. Weirder than usual weird." Noelle's jaw tightened. For a second, just a second, something moved behind her eyes, something that looked like it wanted out, like it was pressing against her ribs from the inside. Then she laughed, short and bright and completely unconvincing. "I'm not being weird, Ro. I think you're projecting your own weirdness onto me." "Don't do that." "Do what?" "That thing where you almost say something real, and then you make a joke instead. You've been doing it all morning." The rain filled the silence between us, drumming on the umbrella, hissing against the rocks. Noelle looked out at the water instead of at me. "I don't know what you want me to say." "I want you to say something true. Rowan, forget it." I turned back toward the tide pools, feeling something hot and unfair rise in my chest. 12 years of swallowed honesty finally curdling into something sharper. "You're a coward, Noelle. You know that? You've always been a coward about this." I regretted it the second it left my mouth. Not because it was untrue, but because of the way her face changed, the way the joke dropped off her completely, and left something younger and more exposed underneath. Something that looked exactly like the 20-year-old girl I'd met at a college party 12 years ago, before either of us knew how to hide from each other. "Wow," Noelle said quietly. "Okay." "Noelle, I didn't mean—" "No, you're right. You're totally right." She handed me the umbrella like it burned her to hold it any longer. "I'm going to head back before the tide comes in." She walked back up the cliff path alone, and I stood there in the rain, with a $2,000 camera around my neck and an umbrella I no longer wanted, watching her go, hating myself for the particular truth of what I'd said and the particular cruelty of saying it out loud. We didn't talk much for the rest of that afternoon. By early evening, the rain had thinned to a drizzle, and Sabrina suggested we all drive into the little town for groceries and whatever souvenirs Lena inevitably wanted to buy, and I think everyone was relieved to have somewhere to put their energy that wasn't the tension sitting quietly between me and Noelle, like a sixth person in the car. The town was small and gray, and pretty in the way coastal towns are when the tourists have mostly gone home for the season. A main street with a hardware store, a bakery with steamed-up windows, a shop that sold saltwater taffy and expensive candles, and a little jewelry store wedged between a bookstore and a place that rented kayaks in the summer. We split up. Brielle and Lena went hunting for the tackiest magnets they could find. Sabrina wanted real coffee, not the instant stuff from the beach house. I wandered toward the bookstore, telling myself I wasn't looking for Noelle, and found her anyway, through the jewelry store window. She didn't see me. She was standing at the counter with a necklace laid out in front of her, a thin silver chain with a small moon-shaped pendant, turning it over in her fingers with an expression I'd never seen on her before, something soft and private and almost sad. The shopkeeper said something. Noelle looked up, saw my reflection in the glass, and put the necklace down so fast it was like she'd been caught doing something illegal. By the time I pushed the door open, she was 3 feet away, examining a rack of postcards like her life depended on it. "Find anything good?" I asked, keeping my voice light, an olive branch. "Just looking." She didn't meet my eyes. "You find your book?" "Not yet." We left the shop separately, a few minutes apart, and I told myself it didn't matter. The necklace, the way she'd looked at it, the way she'd put it down like it was something dangerous. It wasn't until 2 days later, folding laundry in the room we still, awkwardly, shared, that I found the little velvet box tucked into the inside pocket of her suitcase, the moon pendant catching the lamplight when I opened it by accident looking for a missing sock. She'd bought it after all. She just hadn't given it to me. I put it back exactly where I found it and didn't say a word, but I thought about it for the rest of the night, the shape of a gift that existed and didn't, the specific ache of being wanted by someone who couldn't say so. The morning after the necklace, before any of the heavier conversations had happened, The group decided to explore the sea caves at low tide, a whole production involving headlamps and rubber boots, and Lena insisting she'd read somewhere that the caves were haunted, which only made Brielle more determined to go inside first. The caves sat at the base of the cliffs, about a mile down from the house, accessible only for a narrow window around low tide, their mouths dark and dripping and smelling of salt and cold stone. Noelle and I ended up at the back of the group without really meaning to, our headlamps throwing twin circles of light across water-carved walls, the sound of the ocean muffled and strange this deep in, replaced by the steady drip of water and the echo of Brielle's voice somewhere ahead, still narrating an imaginary ghost story for Lena's benefit. It was quieter back there, close, our shoulders brushing every few steps in the narrow passage, neither of us moving away from the contact the way we might have a few days earlier. "You used to be scared of caves," Noelle said, her voice low, close to my ear in the tight space. "That trip to Kentucky, junior year, you wouldn't go past the entrance of that one cavern tour for 20 minutes. I remember you making fun of me for it the whole drive home. I wasn't making fun of you. I was trying to make you laugh so you'd stop looking like you wanted to cry about a bat." She bumped my shoulder gently. "I've always paid more attention to you than I let on, in case that's not obvious by now." "It's becoming obvious," I said, and something passed between us in the dark, easy and warm, a small thaw after the tension of the past 2 days, before Brielle's voice echoed back down the passage demanding to know if we were coming or if we planned to make out in a sea cave, which neither of us dignified with a response, though I noticed Noelle's ears went pink in the beam of my headlamp, and mine probably did too. We came out blinking into daylight 20 minutes later, damp and sandy and laughing about nothing in particular, and for a little while it felt like it used to feel, before the trip started cracking something open between us. Easy, uncomplicated, 12 years of friendship without an undercurrent pulling at it. It didn't last. Nothing that week seemed able to stay uncomplicated for long, not once we'd both started noticing what we were trying so hard not to notice. That night, unable to sleep and unwilling to lie in the dark analyzing every touch from the caves, I found Noelle awake too, restless, and we ended up driving into town well past midnight to the one diner that stayed open all night, a chrome and vinyl place with a bored waitress and a jukebox that only seemed to know songs from decades before either of us was born. We slid into a booth by the window, ordered milkshakes we didn't really want, and talked about nothing that mattered for almost an hour. Old roommates, bad dates, a documentary Noelle had fallen asleep during twice. The kind of easy conversation that used to be effortless between us, and now felt like something we were both working hard to protect. "Remember our first apartment?" Noelle asked, stirring her milkshake with the paper straw. "That terrible one-bedroom with the radiator that only worked in July? You made me sleep on the couch for 2 months because you said the bedroom had better light for your plants." "My plants needed that light, Rowan. They were struggling. You didn't even have plants yet. You bought them after I moved to the couch. Out of guilt, I'm fairly sure." She laughed, real and unguarded, the sound of it loosening something tight in my chest. "Okay, that might be true. I don't regret it. Best 2 months of terrible sleep I ever had, listening to you complain about that couch every single morning. You're a menace. You love me anyway." She said it lightly, the way we always said things like that, tossed off and half-joking, safe inside 12 years of precedent. Except this time, something flickered across her face the second the words left her mouth, some awareness of what she'd said, and how true it actually was. And the diner went quiet around us in a way that had nothing to do with the empty tables. "I do," I said, quieter than I meant to, watching her face carefully. "You know I do." She didn't answer that. She looked down at her milkshake, throat working, and changed the subject to something about the drive back, and I let her, because neither of us was ready yet for what would have come next if she hadn't. Game night was Lena's idea, because everything chaotic that happened on that trip was Lena's idea. She'd found a stack of old party games in the hall closet, wine bottles multiplying on the coffee table as the fire cracked and spit in the hearth, and by 10 o'clock we were all a little loose and loud, sprawled across the couches while the wind threw rain at the windows in fitful bursts. The game was one of those question card things, half truth or dare and half psychological excavation, and it had been harmless enough for the first 20 minutes. Favorite childhood memory, worst travel disaster, most embarrassing crush in middle school, until Lena pulled a card, read it silently, and burst out laughing. "Oh, this is a good one," she said. "Have you ever been in love with someone in this room?" The room did the thing rooms do. A ripple of laughter and groaning, and someone throwing a couch pillow, Brielle immediately shrieking, "Sabrina! Is it your husband? Do you love your husband? Shocking!" And Sabrina laughing, and saying something dry about anniversaries. And it was all very light and very funny, until the card landed, inevitably, on Noelle. She went still. Not dramatic still, not performed still. The kind of still that happens to your whole body when something lands too close to a nerve, when the joke stops being a joke. The firelight moved across her face, and she didn't say anything, and the silence went on a beat too long, 2 beats, 3, long enough that even Lena's smile started to falter. "Noelle," Brielle said, softer now. "I need some air," Noelle said, and got up so fast she nearly knocked over her wine glass, and was out the sliding door to the deck before anyone could stop her, the storm swallowing the sound of the door behind her. The room went quiet in a different way. Sabrina looked at me. I looked at the door. Lena said, "Oh no, did I?" And Sabrina said, "It's fine, Lena, go check on the fire," which was Sabrina's way of clearing a path, and I got up and followed Noelle out into the wet dark before I'd fully decided to. She was standing at the deck railing with her arms wrapped around herself, rain misting sideways in the wind, staring out at an ocean she couldn't see. I came up beside her, not too close, close enough. "Hey," I said. "I'm fine." "You don't have to be fine. You just have to be honest," which is apparently a completely different thing for you. She let out a short, wet laugh that wasn't really a laugh. "That's not fair." "None of this is fair, Noelle." I turned to face her, rain collecting in her hair, in her eyelashes. "You've been running from me for 2 days. You held me all night, and then you couldn't look at me at breakfast. You bought me a necklace and hid it in your suitcase like it was contraband. What are you so afraid of?" Her head came up sharply. "You went through my stuff?" "I was looking for a sock. That's not the point, and you know it." She was quiet for a long moment, the wind pulling at both of us, and when she finally spoke, her voice was low, raw, stripped of the performance she'd been wearing all week. "I'm afraid," she said slowly, like each word cost her something, "that if I say what I actually feel, I lose the only thing I've ever been sure of. You, us. Whatever this is, whatever we've been for 12 years, I'd rather have that forever than risk it for something that might not." The sliding door banged open behind us. "Guys," Lena set the popcorn on fire. "It's not a big deal, but also, it's kind of a big deal." Brielle's voice, breathless with laughter, cutting through the moment like a blade. Noelle stepped back from me so fast it was like I'd burned her too. "I should help," she said, and was gone before I could grab the sentence she'd almost finished, the one still hanging in the rain between us, unfinished and aching. I couldn't sleep that night, not with the ghost of her unfinished sentence still hanging around the edges of my thoughts, so I gave up around 1 in the morning and padded downstairs to make tea. The house was dark and quiet except for the storm, which had settled into a steady rhythm against the windows, less violent now, more like breathing. I was standing at the stove waiting for the kettle when I heard footsteps behind me and didn't need to turn around to know who it was. "Couldn't sleep either?" Noelle said. "Guess not." She came to stand beside me at the counter, close but not touching, both of us watching the kettle like it owed us an explanation. She was wearing an old college sweatshirt, sleeves pulled down over her hands, hair loose around her shoulders, and in the low light over the stove she looked younger than 30. Looked like the girl I'd met at that party 12 years ago who'd handed me a warm beer and said something so unfunny I'd laughed anyway just to be kind. "About earlier," she started. "You don't have to." "I want to." She wrapped her sleeve-covered hands around a mug she hadn't filled yet, just for something to hold. "You asked me something today, on the walk, why I've been weird. And I gave you nothing, and that wasn't fair, because you deserve better than nothing from me. You always have." I turned the burner off before the kettle could scream, the sudden silence loud in the kitchen. Then tell me. Noelle was quiet for a moment, looking down at the empty mug. Camille, she said finally, when you were with her, I watched you shrink. I watched you become smaller and quieter and more careful, trying to be a person she couldn't complain about, and it made me so angry I couldn't see straight, because I knew you weren't hard to love. You were never hard to love. She just didn't know what she was holding. The words landed somewhere under my ribs, heavier than she probably meant them to be, or maybe exactly as heavy as she meant them to be. Anyone who made you feel hard to love, she said again, quieter now, like she was talking as much to herself as to me, never knew what they were holding. I made myself look at her. And what are you holding, Noelle? Her mouth opened. Closed. I watched something war behind her eyes, 12 years of careful distance fighting against whatever had cracked open in her at the deck railing, and for one long moment I thought she was actually going to say it, whatever it was, the thing she'd almost said in the rain. Instead, she looked away, poured hot water into her mug with hands that weren't quite steady, and said, I'm holding a cup of tea I don't even want, with a laugh that fooled absolutely no one, least of all herself. I let her have it. I didn't push. But I noticed, walking back up the stairs behind her in the dark, that she reached back once, just once, and found my hand with hers, and held it the whole way up, like she couldn't say the truth out loud, but couldn't stop her body from telling it anyway. The storm finally broke on our fourth night, clearing into one of those impossibly starry coastal skies that made the whole group decide, unanimously and a little recklessly, to build a bonfire down on the beach. We hauled driftwood and blankets down the cliff path while the last of the daylight bled orange over the water, and Brielle produced a bag of marshmallows from somewhere with the triumphant energy of a woman who had planned this the entire trip. It was there, wrapped in a flannel blanket, with the fire throwing gold light across the sand, that a woman named Tessa wandered over from a neighboring fire with two of her friends, drawn by Lena's laughter, and ended up sitting cross-legged in the sand directly across from me. She was pretty in an easy, open way, the kind of woman who complimented my camera without trying to sound impressive about it, who asked good questions and listened to the answers, who laughed at my jokes like they were actually funny and not just polite. I didn't want her, not really, but I let her flirt with me anyway, because it felt good to be looked at like that, to be someone's whole attention for 20 minutes, after 2 days of aching for a woman who couldn't say what she wanted out loud. Tessa asked about my photography. I told her about the trip, about Portland, and she leaned in a little closer every time the fire popped. And across the flames, I felt Noelle's eyes on me like a physical weight. You've got a great eye, Tessa said, nodding at the camera resting against my knee. I'd love to see more of your work sometime. Are you around town long? Just a few more days, I said, and something in me, something small and unkind and very aware of the woman sitting 4 feet away, gripping a marshmallow stick like it had personally wronged her, added, but I'm around. Tessa smiled. Noelle's jaw tightened so visibly that Brielle, sitting beside her, actually glanced over in concern. Hey, Ro, Noelle said, too brightly, too suddenly. Can you help me find more driftwood? The fire's dying. The fire was not dying. The fire was fine. But I got up anyway, because some part of me wanted to see how far she'd go. And we walked a few yards down the dark beach together, out of earshot, the ocean loud and restless beside us. There's no driftwood mission, is there? I said. There could be. Noelle? She exhaled hard, running a hand through her hair, and for once didn't reach for a joke to hide behind. I don't like watching her look at you like that, she admitted, low and clipped, like the words were being pulled out of her with pliers. Like what? Like she gets to. I felt something hot rise in my chest. Not quite anger, something closer to exhaustion. You don't get to be jealous, Noelle. Not when you won't even say what you're jealous over. You can't have it both ways. You can't hold me all night and then pretend it never happened, and then get territorial when someone else pays attention to me. That's not fair to either of us. She didn't have an answer for that. She just stood there in the dark with her arms crossed, jaw tight, looking like a woman losing a fight she refused to admit she was in, and I walked back to the fire alone, leaving her with the ocean and whatever she wasn't saying. 2 nights later, I walked up to the old lighthouse alone, needing distance from the noise of the house, from Brielle's teasing and Lena's chaos, and the particular exhaustion of pretending everything was fine. The lighthouse sat at the edge of the point, dark and disused, its beam long dead, but the little overlook beside it caught the last color of the sunset spilling out across the water, and I wanted to photograph it before the light was gone. I wasn't alone for long. Tessa found me there. A coincidence, or not quite, she admitted with a small laugh. She'd seen me heading up the trail and followed, and we talked for a few minutes about nothing important. The lighthouse, the town, the way the fog rolled in some mornings, and I was midway through explaining an exposure setting when I heard footsteps on the gravel behind us. Noelle. She didn't say hello. She walked straight up like she had every right to be there, positioned herself a little too close to my shoulder, and said, with a tightness in her voice that wasn't quite polite, "Rowan, Sabrina's looking for you. Something about dinner." Tessa, sensing the sudden temperature drop, made a graceful exit, and the second she was out of earshot, I rounded on Noelle. Months, years, of restraint finally giving out. "What is wrong with you?" "Nothing's wrong with me." "You interrupted a conversation that had nothing to do with you, for the second time this trip, because you can't stand watching someone else be interested in me, and yet you won't stand here and tell me why. You don't get to keep doing this, Noelle. You don't get to touch me like I belong to you and then pretend I don't." "I'm trying to protect us," she said, voice cracking on the last word. "I'm trying to protect what we have, because it's the best thing in my life, Rowan. It's 12 years of the best thing I have, and if I say what I actually want and it goes wrong, I lose everything, not just some of it, all of it. The silence is what's destroying it." My voice came out louder than I meant it to, echoing off the old lighthouse stone. "Don't you see that? I would rather have this hurt, right now, honestly, than spend one more year of pretending we don't feel what we feel. I am so tired of pretending, Noelle. I have been tired of it for years." She went very quiet. The wind moved between us, salt thick, cold, carrying the last light off the water. She stepped closer, close enough that I could feel the warmth coming off her, close enough that her eyes dropped to my mouth for one unmistakable second, and for a heartbeat I thought, I was sure, that she was going to close the distance completely. She didn't. She stopped herself an inch away, breath uneven, eyes wet in the fading light, and stepped back like the ground had shifted under her. "I can't," she whispered. "Not like this. Not if I might be wrong about what you want." "You're not wrong," I said, but she was already shaking her head, already retreating, and I was too proud, too raw, too hurt by an inch of empty space to chase her down the trail. I turned and walked the other way instead, down toward the overlook, and let the wind take whatever I might have said next. The next morning, against every reasonable judgment, we all decided to hike the coastal trail before the weather turned again. 5 women and a forecast that promised clear skies until at least noon. The forecast lied. We were barely 40 minutes in, cameras out, laughing at Lena's increasingly unhinged commentary about a suspicious-looking seal, when the sky opened without warning, and the trail turned to slick mud beneath our boots. I was trying to protect my camera bag, angling my body to shield it from the rain, when my foot found a root I hadn't seen, and the ground simply wasn't there anymore. I went down hard, sliding a few feet down the muddy slope before my hip caught a rock and stopped me. Camera bag clutched against my chest, like it mattered more than my own body, which in that moment it apparently had. "Rowan!" Noelle was beside me before I'd even finished sliding down the mud herself to reach me, hands already moving over my arms, my legs, my head, checking with a speed and precision that had nothing to do with best friend instinct, and everything to do with 3 years of emergency room training taking over her entire nervous system. "I'm fine," I said, though my voice came out shakier than I meant it to. "I'm fine, it's just my leg." "Don't move yet, let me look." Her hands were steady even though her voice wasn't, checking my scalp, my collarbone, working down to the long scrape along my shin where my jeans had torn against the rock, blood welling up dark against the rain-wet skin. "Can you feel this? Does anything feel wrong? Sharp? Anything you're not telling me because you're being stubborn? Just a scrape, Noelle. I promise. She helped me up with an arm braced hard around my waist, and the walk back to the beach house was slow and careful. Noelle's attention locked on me with an intensity that made the rest of the group fall quiet, even Brielle, even Lena, all of them sensing something in Noelle's face that none of us had seen before. Not annoyance, not worry, exactly. Something closer to fear. Back at the house, she sat me on the closed lid of the toilet in the upstairs bathroom, first aid kit open on the counter, and cleaned the scrape on my leg with a gentleness that made my throat tight. Her hands, so steady on the trail, were trembling now, just slightly, as she worked antiseptic along the wound. Noelle, hold still. Noelle, look at me. She didn't, not at first, focused hard on the gauze, on the tape, on anything that wasn't my face. When she finally did look up, her eyes were bright, with something she was fighting hard to keep contained. You scared me, she said quietly. I saw you go down, and I have never in my life been that scared. Not in the ER, not ever. And I don't know what to do with how scared I was, Rowan, because it wasn't just friends scared. It was something so much bigger than that, and I don't know how to keep pretending it isn't. I reached down and covered her trembling hand with mine, stilling it against my knee. Then stop pretending, I said softly. Please, I can't do this anymore either. She looked at our hands, at me, at the space between us that had been shrinking all week and had finally run out of room to shrink any further, and something in her face broke open, gently, like a held breath finally released. I was awake, she said. That first night, in bed, you asked me if I was awake and I lied, and I've been lying by omission every single day since, and I'm so tired, Rowan. I'm so tired of being scared of you finding out something you already know. Tell me anyway, I whispered. I want to hear you say it. She took a breath that shook on the way in. I've held myself back for years, longer than you probably think. I remember you falling asleep on my shoulder on that red-eye to Chicago, junior year, and I didn't move for 4 hours because I didn't want you to wake up. I remember holding you the night you cried after your first real breakup and thinking, this is the only place I want to be, and being terrified of what that meant. I remember you dancing barefoot in my kitchen at 2 a.m. after too much takeout, completely ridiculous, completely happy, and I remember thinking I would do anything, to keep being the person who got to see you like that. I remember you showing up at the hospital after my worst shift of the year, at 11 at night, just to bring me soup, because you knew, without me saying a word, exactly what I needed. Her voice cracked. She pressed on anyway. I kept telling myself friendship was safer, that I could love you like this forever, and it would be enough, because at least I'd never lose you completely. But that night, in bed, when you almost moved away and I pulled you back without deciding to, I lost control for 1 minute. 1 single minute where I let myself hold you the way I've wanted to hold you for years, without pretending, and it was the most honest thing I'd done in a decade, and I have not stopped thinking about it since. I was crying, quietly, not sad tears, something fuller than sadness. Noelle, I love you, she said, like the words had been waiting behind her teeth for years, finally given permission to exist. I'm in love with you. I have been for so long I don't remember what it felt like before. I didn't answer with words. I reached up and framed her face with both hands, and she went still the way she'd gone still that first night, breath caught, eyes searching mine like she still couldn't quite believe this was allowed, and I closed the distance she'd been too afraid to close at the lighthouse. The kiss was slow, careful. Her hands came up to cover mine where they rested against her jaw, and for a moment neither of us moved beyond that, just breath and closeness, and 12 years of almost finally becoming something real. When she finally kissed me back, really kissed me back, it wasn't hesitant at all. It was relief. It was years of restraint breaking loose all at once, gentle, and then deeper. Her fingers sliding into my hair, my hands fisting in the front of her shirt like I was afraid she might disappear if I let go. We broke apart slowly, foreheads still touching, both of us breathing like we'd run somewhere instead of simply, finally, stopped running. That's what I've been holding, Noelle whispered, and laughed, wet and shaky and real. In case that wasn't clear. I woke the next morning in a panic I hadn't expected. Not because the kiss had felt wrong. It had felt more right than almost anything in my life. But because, in the gray light of morning, alone in the bed we hadn't shared the night before, every fear I'd buried for 12 years came flooding back at once. What if this cost us everything? What if love ruined the one relationship I couldn't survive losing either? What if Noelle woke up regretting it? Or worse, what if I did? Noelle, for her part, didn't push. She gave me space at breakfast, quiet and careful, not chasing, not crowding, clearly trying to respect whatever she thought I needed. It should have felt considerate. Instead, it felt like losing her all over again, a fresh kind of ache I had wanted. Some stubborn, unreasonable part of me had wanted her to fight for this, to close the distance the way she'd finally learned to, and instead, the space between us just kept growing, polite and terrible, all morning. Sabrina found me on the back deck around midday, wrapped in a blanket, staring at the ocean without really seeing it. She sat down beside me without asking, the way she did everything, calm and unhurried. "You look like someone who got exactly what she wanted and is now furious about it," Sabrina said. I laughed despite myself. That obvious? "Rowan, we've all watched you and Noelle orbit each other for 6 years. It's not subtle." She was quiet for a moment, letting the wind fill the space. "Can I say something you didn't ask for?" "Please?" "You're not scared of losing her as a friend. That ship sailed the second she kissed you, or you kissed her, whichever version we're telling, and you both know it. I think you're scared of something else. I think you're scared of being fully known by someone who's had 12 years to memorize every flaw you have, and loving you anyway. That's harder than losing someone. Being that seen is harder than almost anything." I sat with that for a long time, the truth of it settling into my chest like something finally finding its shape. "When did you get so wise?" "Married 11 years to a very patient man. You pick things up." She bumped my shoulder with hers. "Go talk to her. She's hiding in the kitchen pretending to reorganize the spice rack, which is the most obvious tell I've ever seen from that woman." Meanwhile, as I found out later, Brielle had cornered Noelle in that very kitchen, arms crossed, uncharacteristically serious. "We've all watched you two circle each other for years," Brielle told her, no teasing in her voice for once. "Don't you dare be noble about this now. Don't you dare give her space, when what she actually needs is you showing up. If you break her heart being careful, I will never forgive you, and neither will she." "I don't want to break her heart," Noelle had said. "That's the whole problem, Brielle. I don't know how not to." "Then stop being careful," Brielle told her. Careful isn't working. It never has. On our last night on the coast, I found Noelle up at the lighthouse again, standing where we'd stood days before, the little velvet box turning over and over in her hands. She heard me on the gravel and didn't startle this time, didn't retreat behind a joke. She just waited for me to come stand beside her, the ocean loud and dark below the point, the same wind pulling at both of us. "I bought this the day we went into town," she said, opening the box, the little silver moon catching what light there was. "It reminded me of the ocean the first night you cried in my car. Do you remember that? Freshman year of knowing each other, some guy had been terrible to you, and you cried in my passenger seat under a full moon on the drive home, and I remember thinking, I would do anything to make sure she never cries like that again." She turned the pendant in her fingers. "I never meant to give it to you. Giving it to you felt like admitting everything, and I wasn't ready. I don't think I've been ready for years. Are you ready now?" She looked at me, and something in her face had changed since the day we'd stood in this exact spot, and she'd stopped herself an inch from my mouth. There was no fear left in it, or if there was, it wasn't winning anymore. "I want to try," I said, "to stop pretending, both of us, all the way, not just in stolen moments when the fear gets too loud to keep pushing down. If you want me, Noelle, you have to say it while we're both standing here, awake, sober, brave. Not almost, not later, now." She didn't hesitate this time. "I love you," she said, clear and steady, the words no longer trapped behind her teeth. "I want you, not as a habit, not as comfort I can talk myself out of in the morning, Not as some secret I keep telling myself is safer than the truth. I want the real thing, Rowan. I want you, all the way, for as long as you'll let me. I closed the distance between us this time, and there was no hesitation left in either of us. The kiss was warmer than the first one, deeper, more certain, her hand coming up to cradle the back of my neck like she never intended to let me go again. Mine sliding around her waist to pull her closer, both of us breathing each other in like we'd been starving for it. It went on, unhurried, full of years of longing finally allowed to exist in the open air, until a distant whoop of laughter carried up from the trail below, Brielle, unmistakably, followed by Lena's delighted shriek, and we broke apart laughing against each other's mouths, foreheads pressed together, both of us glowing. "They're going to be insufferable about this," Noelle said. "Completely insufferable," I agreed, and kissed her again anyway, because I could, because we finally could, and down on the trail our friends cheered, like we'd just won something enormous, which, in a way, we had. Noelle lifted the necklace from its box. "Can I?" I turned, lifting my hair, and she fastened the clasp at the back of my neck with careful fingers, her lips brushing once, softly, against my shoulder when she was done. I woke on our last morning the same way I'd woken that very first night. An arm around my waist, a face close to the back of my neck, warmth pressed along the length of me under the tangled sheets. But everything about it was different now. There was no careful, too even breathing. No fingers curled tight into my shirt like they were bracing for me to pull away. Noelle's hand was simply resting over mine where it lay against my stomach, open, unguarded. And when I shifted to look back at her eyes were already open, watching me with an expression I'd never once seen on her face in 12 years of friendship. Something unguarded and certain, and entirely without fear. "Are you asleep?" I asked, echoing that first terrified whisper from a week ago, when the question had felt like diffusing a bomb. "Not this time," she said, and smiled, slow and easy, and kissed my shoulder, my jaw, the corner of my mouth, unhurried, like we had all the time in the world, instead of one last morning on the coast. "I don't think I want to pretend to be asleep around you ever again, honestly. Seems like a waste of good mornings. You're going to be insufferable about this for the rest of our lives, aren't you?" "Completely," she agreed, pulling me closer. "Get used to it." Downstairs, the whole house smelled like coffee and bacon, and the last of Sabrina's sourdough, morning light finally breaking clean and gold over a calm ocean after a week of storms. And when we came down holding hands, actually holding hands, in front of everyone, no explaining it away as a best friend habit, the kitchen erupted. "Finally," Brielle bellowed, loud enough to startle a gull off the deck railing, throwing both arms in the air like she'd personally scored a goal. "I have been waiting 6 years for this exact moment. I want that on the record. 6 years." "We know, Brielle, you've said," Sabrina said, laughing, but she got up and hugged us both anyway, warm and unsurprised. The hug of someone who'd seen this coming since the deck conversation days ago, and had simply been waiting for us to catch up to ourselves. Lena was already narrating the moment like a nature documentary, something about the elusive best friends finally mating for life, which made Noelle throw a dish towel at her head, and Brielle was demanding every detail of the lighthouse. And somewhere in the noise and the laughter and the bright morning light, Noelle reached over and touched the little silver moon resting at the base of my throat, and I caught her looking at it, and at me, with an expression so soft it made my chest ache in the best possible way. "You're really wearing it," she said quietly, under the chaos. "I'm really wearing it." "Good," she said. "I meant every word of what it cost me to give it to you." We packed up the beach house that afternoon in the particular bittersweet chaos of the last day of a trip. Towels still damp from the hot tub, sand in every suitcase no matter how carefully anyone shook out their shoes, Lena insisting she needed one more photo at the overlook before we left, Brielle already texting a group chat asking when the next trip could happen, because clearly, she said, this one had been eventful enough to warrant a sequel. Noelle carried my camera bag down to the car without being asked, the way she'd always done. Except now she stopped at the trunk and kissed me before she set it down, unhurried, in front of everyone, like it was simply a thing we did now, the most natural thing in the world. The drive back to Portland took 5 hours, and Noelle fell asleep against my shoulder, somewhere around the halfway point. The same way she'd fallen asleep against me 100 times over 12 years of friendship. Except this time, I didn't have to pretend the small thrill of it away. I let myself feel it fully, her weight against my arm, her hand loose in mine on the console between us. The quiet, settled happiness of finally getting to keep something I'd spent over a decade, convincing myself I wasn't allowed to want. The weeks after the trip moved fast, in the way life does, when something in it has fundamentally shifted. I spent most of them in my little home studio in Northeast Portland, going through the thousands of photos I'd taken on the coast, sorting them into a series I hadn't fully planned but that emerged anyway, almost on its own. Stormlight over gray water, the lighthouse at dusk, Brielle laughing so hard she doubled over on the beach, Lena mid-cartwheel on wet sand, Sabrina's quiet smile over a coffee mug, and one photograph, near the end of the sequence, that I kept coming back to more than any other. The ocean at dawn, taken the morning after the lighthouse, the sky just beginning to color at the edges, the water calm and silver and full of a kind of hope I hadn't known how to name when I pressed the shutter. We didn't rush to define things in some big dramatic conversation the way I'd half expected we might. Instead, the shift happened in 100 small, ordinary ways that felt more honest than any single declaration could have. Noelle started leaving a toothbrush at my place, then a drawer of clothes, then simply stopped mentioning her own apartment at all, except to complain about her landlord raising the rent on a place she was barely sleeping in anymore. I started leaving my camera bag by her door instead of always carrying it home. Started keeping a second coffee mug in her kitchen cabinet, the blue one she claimed as mine, without either of us discussing it. We told our families separately, in our own ways and our own time, mine over a slightly nervous phone call that turned out to require far less courage than I'd built it up to need. My mother saying only, after a pause, "Well, it's about time, we all thought so years ago," which made me laugh so hard I had to sit down. Noelle's parents took a little longer to come around to the idea out loud, though her mother had apparently been asking, gently, every holiday for 3 years, whether there was something going on between us that Noelle wasn't telling her, so the actual announcement landed less like news and more like confirmation of something everyone had quietly known. Brielle, predictably, could not stop bringing it up. She created a group chat titled, "Without Irony," we called it first, and populated it entirely with old photos of me and Noelle from over the years. Birthdays, holidays, a dozen unremarkable afternoons where we were standing closer together than two just friends typically stood, laughing at something only the two of us seemed to find funny. Exhibit 47, she'd caption one. A picture from 4 years earlier of Noelle asleep on my shoulder on a couch, my hand resting loosely in her hair like it belonged there. Your Honor, the defense rests. There were harder moments too, quieter ones, nobody teased about. A night, maybe 3 weeks after the trip, when Noelle came home from a particularly brutal shift, someone young she hadn't been able to save, and instead of the careful, controlled version of herself she usually offered the world, she simply came apart in my kitchen, and I held her on the floor with her scrubs still on until the shaking stopped. There was no performance left in either of us by then, no best friend habit to hide behind, just two people who had finally stopped pretending they didn't need each other exactly this much. A gallery in the Pearl District picked up the series for a small show 2 months later, my first real solo exhibition, the kind of thing I'd been working toward for years without quite believing it would happen. Noelle picked up an extra shift that week to cover for a coworker's family emergency, and I told her not to worry about making the opening, that I understood, that ER schedules didn't bend for anyone, least of all art shows. She came anyway. She walked in 40 minutes late, still in her scrubs, hair coming loose from its bun, exhaustion written plainly across her face, and underneath it, unmistakably, pride, the specific, glowing pride of someone who wouldn't have missed this for anything, who had come straight from 12 hours of other people's emergencies, because she needed to see this one thing that was entirely good. She kissed my temple, smelling faintly of hospital antiseptic and the coffee she'd clearly downed on the drive over, and I felt the particular warmth of being chosen, again, in the middle of an exhausting day, by someone who had spent 12 years too afraid to choose me openly at all. It struck me, watching her study the photographs on the wall with genuine, unhurried attention, instead of the polite scanning most gallery guests offered, that this was what I had actually wanted the whole time. Not grand gestures, not some cinematic confession, just this. Her, showing up. Her, choosing to be here instead of somewhere easier. "You didn't have to come straight from work," I said, when she found me near the back of the gallery, in front of the dawn photograph. I wanted to. She slid her arms around my waist from behind, chin resting on my shoulder, both of us facing the photograph together, the calm water, the breaking light, the whole quiet hope of that particular morning. "I wasn't about to miss you finally getting exactly what you've always deserved." "I already have that," I said, leaning back into her, feeling her arms tighten around me, no pretending left in either of us, none needed. "I've had it for a while now." Behind us, the gallery hummed with quiet conversation and the soft clink of wine glasses, strangers admiring photographs of a week that had changed everything, with no idea what it had cost either of us to get here, or what it meant that we finally had. I stood there in the warm gallery light, with Noelle's arms around my waist, and understood, fully, for the first time, that the safest place in the world had never been the friendship we'd protected for 12 years by staying silent. It was this, the love we'd finally, bravely, told the truth about,